Today we'll be looking at the New Zealand Ministry of Defence's procurement process for the LAV III, known specifically as the NZLAV. Having been delivered to the NZDF in the early 2000s, the vehicles are now in need of an upgrade after nearly a quarter-century of service. But today we take a look at the somewhat messy procurement of these vehicles, their capabilities, fleet changes, and what comes next. The NZLAV, based on the LAV III by General Dynamics Land Systems Canada, is an 8-wheeled vehicle having a 19 to 21 metric ton gross vehicle weight rating, depending on configuration. It's transportable by land, sea and air, including C-130H airlift at reduced weight. The vehicle measures 6.98 meters in length, 2.83 meters in width, and 2.87 meters in height. A mid-mounted turret carries the vehicle armament consisting of an M242 25mm cannon, coaxial and roof-mounted Mag 58 7.62mm machine guns, and 2 banks of 76mm grenade launchers. The vehicle has a crew of 3 comprising the commander, gunner and driver, and can carry 7 fully equipped soldiers. Being the New Zealand Army's largest, heaviest combat vehicle, how did the country come to choose this platform? Well, to answer this question, we go right to the beginning of the LAV story, back in May 1997. This was when the Army submitted to the NZDF a force development proposal that made a case to upgrade the existing fleet of armoured personnel carriers and to acquire new fire support vehicles. The NZDF agreed that the acquisition of new vehicles was a high priority because its 78 tracked M113A1s were purchased in the late 1960s and by the late 1990s were considered outdated and poorly armoured. At the same time, the Army's 26 fire support vehicles, Scorpion light tanks fitted with a large caliber gun, were withdrawn from service in 1998. A government report states that one option considered but rejected was to have existing M113A1s upgraded to have more of a fire support vehicle capability. However, it was assessed that fitting a gun turret to the vehicles would have significantly reduced the space available within the vehicle for transporting troops. The report goes on to say that many were of the opinion that the military should stick with tracked armoured vehicles. However, the NZDF noted that other armies were moving to wheeled vehicles and expressed concerns about which would be the best option. Later reviews, considering the requirements of modern battlefield situations where New Zealand troops were likely to be engaged, concluded that New Zealand's forces were more likely to be engaged in manoeuvre warfare, alongside more heavily equipped allies, rather than attritional warfare. As such, wheeled vehicles were considered to have greater operational mobility compared to tracked vehicles. In 1998, the Minister of Defence wanted the military to consider a joint purchase with Australia of a wheeled armoured vehicle known as NZLAV. This vehicle was manufactured by General Motors Defence in Canada as the LAV II. It was noted that a joint purchase with Australia was considered to have potential to accelerate the acquisition of the vehicles. An evaluation team was sent to Australia in December 1998 to evaluate the NZLAV's suitability. However, the Kiwis quickly learned that the Australian Army's prime use of the NZLAV was as a lighter-weight amphibious reconnaissance vehicle. Thus, it was unable to be fitted with additional armour to provide sufficient levels of ballistic protection to work as an infantry carrier. With the LAV II being 20 years old by that point in time, the Kiwis saw the vehicle as being at the end of its development life. For this reason, the NZLAV was not considered suitable for New Zealand's needs. A few months later, in March 1999, the government was informed that a new generation Canadian variant, the LAV III, was a much better match for New Zealand's needs. It was that same year that the vehicle had achieved Initial Operational Capability, or IOC, and officially entered service with the Canadian Army. The government initially wanted to put out a tender and have interested bidders compete. With this in mind, a consulting firm was hired to do some preliminary research. The consulting firm's report, received in early July 1999, concluded on an initial examination that the detailed specifications, what the military was looking for, were possibly based on the LAV III. And so it was recommended that if the Ministry of Defence was to proceed with a tender, that a number of changes be made in order to make the specifications more generic, so that a variety of vehicles could meet the requirements specified in the tender documents. 17 vehicles were reviewed and held against a long list of criteria which included the following: the presence of growth potential, that is, for the vehicle to be at the start of its development life and not at the end. The vehicle would need to be air transportable by a Hercules C-130, meet legal requirements to be driven on New Zealand roads, and carry a certain number of troops. The consulting firm concluded that there was only one vehicle on the world market that could meet these essential requirements, the Canadian LAV III. It was noted that a second unspecified vehicle came close to meeting the requirements, but it had almost reached the end of its development life. The conclusion was that the LAV III vehicle was so far ahead of the competition that the government might as well consider a direct purchase rather than conducting a tender. The firm noted that if the air transportable by C-130 requirement was removed, then there might be a little more competition. And so the government decided to change this requirement from essential to desirable in the tender specifications, choosing to continue with a competitive bidding process. Despite the slight easing of one requirement, it was clear to others that the competition was designed with the LAV III in mind. Indeed, a representative for the company offering the German Fuchs had this to say to the Ministry of Defence: "A careful examination of the user requirement shows that the LAV III vehicle is the only vehicle that meets all the essential criteria. Therefore, we must ask why any other vehicle manufacturers were issued with tender documents." Another manufacturer also wrote, alleging that the LAV III vehicle seemed to be the only vehicle that could meet the essential requirements in the tender document. After making adjustments and allowing for certain requirements to be waived, the competition carried on and tenders closed in December 1999, with bids received from two vehicles, the LAV III and the Fuchs. The outcome of the evaluation of the tenders was that neither of the two vehicles technically complied with all the requirements of the tender specifications. For the LAV III, the areas of non-compliance were assessed as being minor, but in comparison, the Fuchs was assessed as having significant shortfalls. And so, to make a long story short, the MOD would then enter into discussions with General Motors Defence, which would become General Dynamics Land Systems Canada, to buy 105 vehicles with the aim of fully equipping 2 Army battalions. While it might already seem like quite a long story, it's actually much, much longer and full of so much more detail. With this in mind, we'll be sure to link to the 2001 audit in the video description. Beyond the detailed audit report, this August 2000 question and answer page adds further detail about the decision to go with the Canadian LAV III. One question asked if the Fox, or Fuchs, was a viable option. The answer to this was that acquiring the Fuchs would be more than the total cost of a similar LAV III capability. Individual vehicle costs were assessed to be approximately 10% lower with the Fuchs. However, to motorise 2 battalions, 144 Fuchs would be required against 105 LAV IIIs. The Fuchs was considered deficient in several areas, including mobility, and the proposed turret had never been fitted to a German vehicle. Additionally, while fitting into a C-130 Hercules was said to have not been a determining factor, it was highlighted as something outside of the Fuchs' capabilities. One other question that we found amusing that was actually included on this official government page asked, "Is the LAV III gold-plated?" To which the answer was, no. The vehicle is the standard Canadian LAV armoured personnel carrier. LAV III will have to be in service for 25 years. It must be modern. Across the whole project, the LAV III is fully competitive. While the individual unit cost of the LAV III is higher than some other wheeled vehicles, its greater carrying capacity and its common configuration reduces the overall numbers required. And so that's how the New Zealand Defence Forces ended up going with the Canadian-developed LAV III. The NZLAV's most notable deployment to date is Afghanistan, where the vehicle has been credited with protecting personnel from IED attacks on several occasions. It was stated that one of these vehicles was written off after being badly damaged on deployment. The New Zealand government announced in November 2009 that 3 up-armoured NZLAVs would be sent to assist SAS troops. These vehicles arrived in early 2010 and began operations in theatre to protect personnel from IEDs. Then, in April 2011, 5 additional NZLAVs were redeployed and flown into theatre, bringing the total to 8. If the 2001 audit report didn't stir up enough LAV III related controversy, a follow-up audit at the end of 2004 questioned whether the Army actually needed all 105 vehicles. Indeed, it was suggested that a smaller fleet could have sufficed and that the military was years away from having enough trained personnel to crew them. One media outlet called the LAV deal, quote, one of the Army's most expensive and most controversial purchases. And so, on the topic of having too many vehicles and needing to downsize, it was in 2010 that the government first floated the idea that roughly 35 LAVs might be deemed surplus to requirements. In 2012, the government officially designated 20 NZLAVs for potential divestment. Unable to find an interested buyer, it was in 2018 that the total number of surplus vehicles officially cleared for sale was raised to 30. One high-ranking officer noted that a fleet of 20 would have been too small to generate a genuine interest. A few years would pass with no one seemingly interested. However, it was in April 2022 that the NZDF announced that 22 vehicles had been sold to the Chilean Navy and its Marine Corps for $19.855 million. With 22 out of 30 sold, that leaves 8 more units. Australian Defence magazine reported in May 2024 that the New Zealand Ministry of Defence was in quote-unquote preliminary discussions with the Argentine government around a potential sale of its remaining surplus NZLAVs. Now, at the time of making this video in mid/late 2026, it doesn't look like any sale of these last few NZLAVs has taken place. So, what's the future of the LAV III/NZLAV for New Zealand? Well, this was outlined in the country's 2025 Defence Capability Plan, which stated that turrets would be upgraded, although no more specifics were disclosed. Another section in the document states that from about 2029 is when LAV replacements will come in, with the goal of having a similar armoured vehicle or other technology to enable the combat capability of land forces. And so we can see that the NZLAVs will be around for at least a few years longer, with the original plan to only operate them until around 2028. After doing research for this video and going through government audits and media reports, it's clear that the NZLAV acquisition was a controversial one, and perhaps something the government would rather not repeat. Additionally, given the NZDF's relatively small budget and other much larger spending priorities in the air and maritime domains, we can imagine that the quest to find a true NZLAV replacement will be prolonged as much as possible in favour of those other projects. But what do you think about how New Zealand went about procuring the LAV III? What do you think would be a suitable modern replacement for it when the time comes? Let us know by leaving a comment.